And our guest today for the third and last segment of this series of anarchist theory is Peter Lamborn Wilson. He's also the author of Sacred Drift. He's also a theological scholar, and this is a City Lights book called subtitled Essays on the Margins of Islam. And it proposes a set of heresies, a culture of resistance that dispels the false image of Islam as monolithic, Puritan, and two-dimensional. This is a hot book, folks. And Peter is also a poet and a translator. There's some of that in here. There are different essays. And it offers a scathing critique of authority and sexual misery in modern Puritanist Islam. Yeah. Available at your local good bookstore.
Should plug St. Mark's bookstore.
St. Mark's, which is not on St. Mark's Place, but on 3rd Avenue. You know, the University Bookstore is on 12th Street, and the Cedar Tavern is not on, Cedar Street Tavern is not on Cedar Street. St. Mark's Bookstore, Sacred Drift. And now for our third and, for the time being, concluding chapter on the state.
Yeah, I was actually thinking of this series as sort of more on the anthropology of the state, and in order to bring our dialogue back to an anthropological focus, I thought I would tell you something which I actually haven't had a chance to tell you about, the sort of amateur archaeology work that I did out in Wisconsin this last summer, which is actually turns out to be quite relevant to what we're talking about. Do you know about the Effigy Mounds, Tuli?
No.
Well, in Wisconsin, actually only in one part of Wisconsin and a little chip of Iowa and some of the other states, there's a phenomenon called the Effigy Mounds, which are these they're actually earthworks, earth art,
I didn't know they were called
which are in the shape of animals mostly. There's a few that are in human shape and a few that are objects like pipes, sacred
huge,
pipe.
Right?
They're not so big. You're thinking of the ones in the Serpent Mound in Ohio, for example, which is big, and most people think belongs to another culture altogether. These things tend to be about, at the most 10 feet high. Actually, most of them are only about 5 or 6 feet high. And you can see them without being up in a plane or a tree. I mean, you don't, it's not like the mysterious lines in South America that you have to be in a plane to see them. I think of them as earth art, actually. And these mounds are a great mystery to the archaeologists. And in fact, there's not a lot written about them because no one has ever really had a very viable theory about them. Originally, people used to say that, these are too elaborate to have been built by these Indians, you know, so there must have been a mysterious race of mound builders who were chased out by the Indians. This, of course, this theory is totally wrong. Whoever the mound builders were, they are in fact the ancestors of tribes who still live in that region. And in fact, some of those people have interesting things to say about the mounds. They have a theory of the mounds, which makes a lot more sense than some of the archaeologists and anthropologists' theories. Anyway, since I was staying in this region last summer, I became totally fascinated with these things and the culture that produced them. They're beautiful. They're exquisite. They're exciting. They're mysterious.
Are they covered now with growth?
A lot of them, yeah. A lot of them were. First of all, a lot of them got plowed under by farmers. In the 19th century, there was probably 3 times as many of these things surviving as there are now. And some of them are lost and covered with trees and forests. Some of them got eroded away to nothing, one way or another. But there's still thousands of these things to be seen. Anyway, many hundreds. And it's not so hard to find them. And in fact, within a few hours' drive of where I was staying, there were hundreds to be studied, of which I really only saw a few dozen.
What part of Wisconsin?
This is called the Driftless Region. It's the sort of southwestern part of Wisconsin, about a third of the state, which was never glaciated. The glaciers never came down there. So it's a very nice, interesting landscape with hills and dales and woods and plains, and and you can imagine that in the time when these mounds were built, which was probably from around the turn of BC to AD for about maybe as far as, like, let's say 1000 AD. Nobody really knows for sure. It's very hard to date these things.
But it went on for a long time.
It went on for a long time, and it stayed in this one region. Now, the interesting thing, and where this comes into the theory of the state that we've been discussing, is that before these people showed up in this region, in this part of the world, there were fairly advanced agricultural and metallurgical societies. The so-called Hopewell culture, which preceded it, used copper and had an obvious social hierarchy based on priesthood and an agricultural economy. And after the Mound Builders, another agricultural society came into being, called the Mississippian culture, usually, which had which built forts and obviously knew rather advanced kind of warfare, and clearly was a state. So before and after the Mound Builders, you have agricultural hierarchical societies. The Mound Builders themselves, by all the evidence, were hunter-gatherers. Now, what occurred to me was that somehow these people turned their backs on agriculture and went back, so to speak, to an earlier economy. They seem to have deliberately given up social hierarchy and agriculture and taken up hunting and gathering. And of course, in that region, in this wonderful driftless region of Wisconsin, the ecology must have been incredibly rich. It was one of those kind of parts of the world where if you shoot an arrow into the air and it comes down with the 3 ducks on it, very rich.
Just near like Des Moines, Rockford, Illinois. I mean, just north of the sort of western, southwestern.
Yeah. Madison's right in the middle of it.
Oh, okay.
All right, and so what these people had discovered was that they could lead a life of leisure and plenty by giving up agriculture and going back to hunting and gathering. The proof that they had leisure is that they built thousands of these mounds. Now, so the question then becomes a very interesting one. Is there some kind of spiritual or cognitive relationship between this economic choice that they made and this art, this beautiful spiritual art of the Effigy Mounds? And I began working on the hypothesis that there was some connection, and that the whole thing was a conscious religious political movement that embraced a large number of people over a long period of time, but remained in this one particular area and clearly had a cultural continuity. And we began to see other cave art, for example, that these people produced. It's unbelievably exquisite, really masterful, beautiful cave paintings. And as we studied these cave paintings and the petroglyphs, the designs that are carved into the walls of some of the caves, we began to notice a lot of mushrooms. Everywhere we looked, we were seeing mushroom glyphs. And we even found some that are not in the books. We were
Oh, don't eat those.
No, I mean the glyphs themselves
the glyphs.
had not been...
Drawings of mushrooms or shapes,
yeah,
sculptures of mushrooms.
carved into cave walls.
Sort of field guide, petrolithic field guide.
Well, the more we saw of these, and then as we studied these sites, some of the friends who were with me are good amateur ethnobotanists, and they began to realize that wherever we were going, we were seeing dozens of psychoactive plants, including fly agaric mushrooms, and other things which are not as powerful in the psychoactive department, but which are in fact psychoactive. And the more we began to think about it, the more all of this seemed to somehow tie together. Maybe I'd been reading too much Terence McKenna or something, but it seemed to me an interesting hypothesis that what had fueled this amazing artistic and libertarian movement was, in fact, the psychedelic experience. And once I arrived at that hypothesis, I began to see what appeared to me to be evidence of it everywhere. So I hypothesize, and I'm completely fascinated by this. I'm not giving this out as dogma, and it's something I'd like to do a lot more work on.
So is there
I think what we're
people can...
No, there isn't. No, because the whole, as I said before, there are no adequate interpretations of these things. They're not burial mounds, so the archaeologists are very, you know, they find it, a lot of archaeologists find it very hard to talk about anything that doesn't involve dead people. Or the Hopewell people who came before put lots of groovy stuff into the graves, you know. Artifacts, copper, jewelry, weapons, you know, all sorts of things. The people who came after them, the Mississippians, had terribly elaborate burial mounds and clearly had a priestly caste who were getting buried in big Mexican-style mounds.
Things that we understood that were similar to our culture and religious.
Yeah, we moderns understand those kind of cultures much better than a culture which deliberately turns its back on social hierarchy and goes and supposedly sinks back into a more primitive state. But why did they do it? I think, you know, the obvious payoffs were the payoffs were obvious. They had more leisure. They had a better diet. You know, there's no evidence of warfare in this period. There's no evidence of cannibalism or ritual sacrifice, which there is for the other cultures that I mentioned. They seem to have a peaceful, fruitful, and very, very psychedelic culture going for themselves. So, you know, when you were asking before about can we turn back the clock, and I said no, that wasn't the issue. But still, in a sense, it could be the issue. It is possible for societies to make choices, right, about the structure that they're going to follow. Now, we don't know how these people arrived at these ideas. Was it a religious movement with a prophet who came through saying, do this, do that? Was it some kind of a totally organic, natural process that lasted a long time?
Or was it just a nice dinner of mushrooms?
Or did somebody, have some mushrooms some night and say, hey, what are we doing this work? You know, why are we obeying this priest?
We just found these mushrooms.
Yeah, I mean, the mushroom knows all, tells all, blabs all, you know. As Terence likes to say, it's a complete culture, you know. So, anyway, as I say, it's a working hypothesis that I have at the moment, but it fascinates me because it shows, or seems to show, if my idea is right, that we do have a choice on the social level of what kind of economy, and what kind of spirituality, what kind of relationship to creativity, and what kind of economy. We can choose these things to a certain extent. It has been done in the past, if I'm right about these people. So I just thought I'd bring that up because for me it was it's the first kind of, you know, archaeology that I've ever really done, and it was extremely exciting. I'll tell you, it's addictive. The thrill of finding just one little glyph that's not published in the Wisconsin Archaeology Journal was like, I haven't had so much fun since, well, it was great. It was a really terrific experience, and it made me think a lot about this whole range of issues that we've been discussing.
To connect the idea of leisure with culture, advanced culture, I don't know much about Greek society, but I wonder if the flowering of Greek culture took place after the institution of slavery was established,
well, see,
right?
All right, my hypothesis, hunter-gatherers already had an extremely advanced and egalitarian culture. You can see this if you study pygmies today.
On Crete.
Everybody in the pygmy tribe makes the music. You know, there are no specialists, okay? Then comes agriculture, creates specialization, creates poverty, actually, creates scarcity. And for thousands of years, culture takes a nosedive. We talked last time about how the paintings, the cave paintings of the Ice Age disappeared. And for thousands of years, art was boring. I mean, it was basically just scratches on the walls and palm prints and things like that. It took thousands of years to evolve a culture again, and this time it was done on the backs of slaves
And in
oppressed
Egypt, too.
people. In Egypt, too. So all the, well, actually Mesopotamia, if you want to look at Mesopotamia as the case history, read the mythology and see what kind of ideology was being put down on these people. Human beings were considered to be just the slaves of the gods, i.e. of the priests who represented the gods, and the king who represented the priests. So culture in that sense that you're talking about with the Greeks, which we now think of as the only possible culture.
Not me. I don't...
Yeah, I mean, when I say we, I mean
Okay,
the
them.
general
You mean
run
them.
of ideologists, both on the left and the right, by and large, are confined to thinking that this kind of culture is culture. I think that the importance of studying both tribal societies today in all their poverty and marginality, and as much as we can hypothesize from archaeology about the Stone Age, is extremely important because it should give us not the inspiration to bomb ourselves back to the Stone Age, but the inspiration to see that we do have a choice
Well, what's interesting to me,
as a society.
you were talking 2 shows ago about temporary leadership, where when situations came up, there would be someone to lead you in peacetime, and then if there was a wartime situation, it would be a different person who was chosen, and for different tasks, which would create a moving authority figure, so it wouldn't be centralized, so that one person can dominate the whole.
Yeah, I'm not
create
even sure that I would use the word authority, because it's
Well, see,
that's already.
I'm a creature of my own.
Yeah,
culture.
that word, that's a semantic trap already,
Right,
because
right.
it carries a hypothesis along with it about
Someone who knows more.
Yeah, these are people who are perceived by the tribe as being especially talented for whatever it may be, warfare or shamanizing.
But it goes against the sort of Superman model where
Yeah.
one person
What it
knows
go-
all and
what
the
it-
godlike.
What it goes against is social separation. You see, when you have a permanent priestly caste, that's authority. The shaman is not an authority. The shaman is just someone who's particularly talented at something that, in fact, everybody in that society does to some extent. So he's not an authority. He's, if you like, a specialist, but he's not an authority.
So are there
Or
books
she,
that
I should
people,
say immediately,
people
or
are,
she.
Interested that people can read about these social structures?
Of the Stone Age? Yeah, there's some work has been done on it. I should mention an anthology of papers that came out in '68, I think, called Man the Hunter. I guess nowadays we would call it Man the Hunter and Woman the Gatherer. Actually, would have been a better name for the book. But Marshall Salins and some of the other anthropologists in that school, there was a big breakthrough of interest in hunting and gathering in the 60s, due, in fact, to the hippies and the psychedelic experience. Because the psychedelic experience is a kind of psychic hunting and gathering. You know what I mean? And through those experiences, a lot of young academic anthropologists got very interested in the phenomenon of hunters as a separate group. And that book, Man the Hunter, is very important. It's a landmark in this whole school of thought about non-authoritarian tribal organization. Yeah.
The relationship of leisure to creation of culture, I have a little other development I'd like to point out. The leisure, of course, could be either egalitarian or based on a class structure. And in our times, it's mostly based on the people who create culture. Culture in quotes are the rich and the idle.
Yeah,
but boredom itself, I think, is when you have nothing to do, you think of things to do, and you use your imagination and you explore things. So in a sense, boredom, I think, is a great psychedelic, has great psychedelic power.
Well, there's two different, there are different kinds of boredom. There's the boredom of the worker who's stuck in endless repetition.
Oh yeah, you know, that's
And,
slavery.
that begins already with agriculture.
Boredom out of leisure.
Then there's the kind of elegant boredom
Yeah.
of an aristocrat.
Our kind of boredom.
An
without
aristocrat
the
or a
aristocrat.
tribal person who basically, as I said before, as Marshall Salins discovered, probably took about 2 hours a day.
The free
At
time,
most,
free timers.
Of work, and the work itself was fun for a lot of times, and then there's a lot of time sitting around thinking about new dances, new songs, new funny makeup and hairdos, you know, making everything connected with their life beautiful and graceful in some way. If you look at a really successful tribal culture that has not been polluted by outside, you know, colonialism or imperialism, you'll see that everything that's produced is beautiful and unique. So in that sense, this leisure, unfortunately, it's a bad word because it immediately implies its opposite, which is work.
Right.
There perhaps should be some other term, I don't know what it would be, that escapes that dichotomy.
The Balinese have no word for art.
That's right, because everyone is an artist. As Ananda Kumaraswamy said once, in a normal society, the artist would not be a special sort of person, but every person would be a special sort of artist. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. And this actually does survive even in non-hunting societies like Bali, which is a very hierarchical, very agricultural society. But that concept of everybody being some kind of artist is very, very important. Have you been there?
No.
I've been there. It's still true. I was told in Java, this mystic that I met there said to me in a fit of enthusiasm during our conversation, said, everybody must be an artist.
And be on the octave.
If I have to dance, you can keep your revolution.
So these ideas survive for a long time,
Even through the hierarchy.
even into the hierarchical kind of societies, because you have an artisanal, you know, craft-oriented a society without, if you can avoid slavery and too much hideous poverty on one end and too much conspicuous consumption.
How does the national government
Power
there
on the
impinge
other
on the Balinese society?
Very badly. I'm afraid
Is it going to
say
be preserved in any way?
No, a few years before I was in Bali, the Indonesian government was banning things like cockfighting and so forth, which were very important parts of the tradition.
Well, I would ban that.
Well, I know you would. But when I was there, they had just passed a law that every village in Bali had to have a TV in the village meeting hall.
Oh, I would ban that idea.
Yeah. Well, you see, in a certain respect, cockfighting goes along with not having TVs.
No, they wanted to have cockfights on TV, them to have cockfights on TV, I think.
No, what they want is to have government propaganda.
On TV, right.
And the result, as one interview I read with a Balinese gamelan master, he said, as a result of these TVs in the villages, we don't have gamelan rehearsals anymore. The kids sit around and watch the tube, and we can't get down to work on the gamelan.
Well,
One channel, right?
yeah, that's right.
That, you know, Hitler did that. He gave every German a radio called the Volksführer.
That's
and
right.
guess how many stations there were?
One. It doesn't matter, though. You know,
no,
like,
it does matter because the people wouldn't hear all these wonderful things if we didn't have public access.
That's right.
So it's not always the tool, although the
Yeah, but
tool
listen,
can have a
tool-
negative influence.
There's
It's
all-
how it's used.
Yeah, I make a difference between public media and intimate media. And public access cable, despite the fact that it has the word public in it, is an intimate medium. It's, you know, we're not reaching beyond Manhattan here. We're probably not reaching more than a few hundred people, really, if that.
No, well, we
Whereas
don't mind. It
NBC
wouldn't spoil the effect if it would make it better if we reached it.
Well,
if we had
yeah, but by definition we don't, but and never will.
Not true because
There is only one channel. There really is only one channel of the public discourse.
the high-tech world.
No, I don't know what that means.
It's NYPD, you know, it's
No, no,
NYPD Blue. That's what the one.
No, no,
that's
we
the
have-
one channel.
Violence.
Violence, stupidity,
Well,
lies,
but, you
propaganda,
know,
advertising, misery, ennui. That's all there is. Except
Let's see, violence. What was it?
Yeah.
we
Don't
have,
ask
we
me
have,
to-
there are. What's the pioneer station that's now on satellite? Dee Dee's show, the
Got me.
Dee Dee show started it. I'm blocking it.
Well-
Paper Tiger.
Paper Tiger.
Yeah.
Oh,
And-
well, yeah.
and
This is.
there is that's been put on satellite through the.
Listen, Tuli, if you were
Aid
on
of
network,
capitalist,
if you were on network, I wouldn't be on this show because I don't believe.
Well,
that,
that's a network. That's in the sky, and it can be picked up by public access stations all over the country.
You know what I mean. I'm talking about big commercial network.
Oh,
Okay, we
well,
gotta figure this all out in 3 minutes.
you can be bigger and not be commercial
Well, I think
through accidents. It is an accident. This whole public access, Time Warner challenged this, all public access in courts on the false basis of they're being sued by someone who claimed the public access station libeled them.
All right, let's do that.
And since Time Warner said they weren't responsible, they couldn't control the broadcast. They wanted to just simply remove all the public access stations.
So what is it that?
But the courts ruled against
and they
them.
will eventually.
So let's come
Oh,
down
no,
to
we wouldn't let them do
hunter
that.
gathering and where do we go from here? Hey, and you are in the spotlight.
Where do we go from here? Hunting and gathering.
Well, what do we learn? We learn
I think what we got is
fair time, not leisure time.
what we've got is psychic hunting and gathering. The psychic return of the Paleolithic. The Paleolithic is coming back on the level of the psychic, not necessarily of the economic or the technological. And in fact, if you want to tie it in with the concept of intimate media, I would say there's a necessary gap between the big media and the intimate media, in that the intimate media fulfill, in a way, a function in the world of the psychic hunting and gathering. The intimate media are things that can be approached by individuals in small groups to communicate with other individuals in small groups. This is a little bit like signal drums, you know what I mean?
Well, the difference is the market, too. We're not market-oriented.
That's right. It's a gift. This is the intimate media, by and large, are bringing back the economy of the gift, of reciprocity.
And the idea of friendship.
Yeah, absolutely. All those things which the
Instead of competition, which is
you've
the
got
exact opposite
commodity
in a
world,
capitalist society.
the commodity world on one hand, which runs on advertising and hierarchy and oppression, and on the other hand, you have the intimate media, which runs on an egalitarian basis of friendship and exchange.